Okay, let's try this again. This is chapter 2. Second Earth. I hope I'll see it again someday. Mark Dimmond looked up from the stack of parchment papers in his hand and took a deep breath. His heart was racing. The words on the pages before him seemed as if they were written by his best friend, Bobby Pendragon, but the story they contained was impossible. Yet there it was. He glanced at the pages again. What he saw was frantic writing. Bobby's writing in smudged black ink on some kind of old-fashioned yellow parchment. It looked real, but it felt real, but so much of the story these pages contained felt about as close to reality as a fevered dream. Mark sat safely locked in the second stall from the door of the third floor boys' bathroom at Stony Brook Junior High. It was a rarely used bathroom because it was at the far end of the building, near the art department, way off the beaten track. He'd often come here to. Occasionally, he even used the toilet for its intended purpose, but mostly he came here to get away. At his feet were a pile of carrot ends. He'd been nervously gnawing on them as he scanned the pages. Mark had read somewhere that carrots improved your vision, but after months of almost constant carrot intake, he still had to wear glasses and only had a mouthful of yellow teeth to show for his efforts. Mark knew he wasn't a full-on nerd, but he wasn't running with the cool kids either. His only contact with the world of the accepted was Bobby. They grew up together and were about as tight as two friends could be. As Bobby started to grow up and became popular, Mark kept one foot firmly planted in kid world. He still read comics, he still kept action figures on his desk. He didn't really know popular music, and his clothes were, well, functional. But that didn't matter to Bobby. Mark made him laugh, and Mark made him think. The two would spend hours debating issues as diverse as First Amendment rights and the relative merits of Pamela Anderson before and after cosmetic surgery. A lot of Bobby's jock friends would dump on Mark. They knew better. Mess with Mark and you'd be messing with Bobby, and nobody messed with Bobby. But now, somebody was indeed messing with Bobby. Mark held the proof right here in his hands. He didn't want to believe what the pages told him. Under normal circumstances, he would have thought it was some goofy joke that Bobby thought up. But some things had happened that made Mark think this might not be a joke. He leaned back against the cool tile wall, and his thoughts brought him back to something that had happened the night before. Mark always slept with a nightlight. He was afraid of the dark. This was his secret. Even Bobby didn't know. Though sometimes Mark thought the nightlight was worse than no light at all because a nightlight made shadows. Like the dark jacket hanging on the back of a door like the Grim Reaper. That nasty vision had happened more than once. It didn't help that without his glasses, Mark could barely see things clearly beyond the end of his bed. Still, the occasional rude awakening was much better than sleeping in the dark. The night before, it had happened again. Mark was lying in bed, in and out of sleep. He opened one groggy eye, and in his stupor, he thought he saw someone standing at the foot of the bed. His mind tried to tell him it was just a shadow cast by a passing car, but his gut told him to wake up, fast. A surge of adrenaline shot through him, and his brain went on full alert. He tried to focus his nearsighted eyes on the interloper to confirm it was just his backpack. No go. He couldn't tell what it was, so he gripped his bedside table, knocked over a mouthful of pens and his Game Boy, but managed to grab his glasses. Finally jammed them onto his nose, he looked to the end of the bed and froze in fear. Standing there, lit by soft moonlight streaming in through the window, was a woman. She was tall and dark-skinned. She wore a colorful wrap that draped off one shoulder, revealing an incredibly taut, muscular arm. She looked to Mark to be a beautiful African queen. Mark dug his heels in and pushed his back against the wall behind his bed in the futile hope that he'd crash through and escape out the other side. The woman simply raised his finger to her lips and gave a soft shh sound. Mark froze in absolute paralyzing fear. He looked into the woman's eyes and something strange happened. He grew calm. As he thought back on this moment, he wasn't sure if she was hypnotizing him or casting some kind of spell because, oddly, his fear slipped away. This woman had soft, friendly eyes that told Mark he had nothing to be afraid of. Sha za shu sa.